I keep going back to this concept of what it might look like if we lost everything that we have now. If we lost all of our electricity, if we lost all of our internet, if we lost our ability to communicate with everyone. We would be thinking about how to build our lives by looking at the people who live in the houses next to us, getting together, working together, making sure that everyone has enough to survive, and those people who have certain skills working in those certain skills for the benefit of small communities. You know, if we went back to that communal way of living, there would be far less distress to start out with. What I just read you is an excerpt from an interview with Brenda Lefrancois, which I conducted in preparation for my up-and-coming book, Psychiatry and the Business of Madness. I wanted to begin with it today because it encapsulates much of what I will be talking about today. Hello, my name is Dr. Bonnie Burstow, and welcome to this lecture. Two stark realities underpin my talk today. The first is the invalidity and inherently damaging nature of psychiatry. As those of us who've congregated here know only too well, so-called mental diseases have no medical base. Moreover, psychiatry is a regime of ruling which essentially controls and in the process injures people with what are, after all, brain-damaging treatments, as writers such as Saz, Peter Breggin, and indeed Dorothy Smith have long ago established. The second reality underpinning this talk is the alienated, hierarchical, bureaucratic, capitalistic, patriarchal, and unaccepting nature of society. The point is, in a world of ever-increasing commodification and standardization, in a world geared to the maximization of profits, in a world where we are divorced from others and from nature itself, in a world wherein the commons, and that's what we all share together, is progressively being eroded, where pollution is destroying the very web of life, it is expectable that more and more people will feel alienated, will seem to lose their inner selves. Given this, dismantling institutional psychiatry, while good, is not good enough. Nor is providing the odd humane service. We all talk about empathic counseling, and that's all good, but it is not remotely good enough. The point is, we need to get at the roots and fundamentally change society. For if society remains essentially the same, with a few add-ons here and there, say, we will continue to have a large number of people in difficulty. And we will continue to harm those in trouble. Hence, we need something far more fundamental. What I am recommending is that we give up tinkering and start engaging in utopian thinking, more fundamental thinking. Now, when I use the word utopia, I'm sure that distresses some people, and it feels counterintuitive to some people. But let me be clear what I mean by utopia. What I mean is utopia spelt with an E. That's E-U-T-O-P-I-A, not without an E. Utopia without an E means no place, literally means no place. And so it's a kind of fairyland where everyone sprinkled with fairy dust can fly. Utopia with an E means a better place. And what I'm suggesting is that any kind of services have to be predicated on a far better place. The society which I am suggesting that we need to build would be based on environmentalism, respect for difference, egalitarianism, a commitment to end systemic depressions, participatory decision-making, a sharing and working together, a rebuilding of connection and the commons, mutual caring and compassion. Some basic guidelines here. Our means are as important as our ends. Community and connection is the base. Hierarchy is inherently problematic. Everyone has rights, and everyone has everyone has rights, including the right to choose ways of life that may disturb some of us, that may worry some of us. That has to be a basic human right. No one is expendable. Commodification, reification, disciplines, that's whether it be psychiatry, psychology, or social work, constitute traps. So does professionalization, institutionalization, and also traps. And we all like to talk about professionalization as if it protects people. It, in fact, hems people in through our regimes of ruling. So in this new society, everyone would be an integral part of decision-making. Privatization of the commons would be reversed. Protection of the commons, including the air we breathe, would be paramount. Sexism, classism, racism, homophobia would be carefully guarded against. People would operate in small communities with attention paid to the welfare of both those in the various communities to which they belong and to the larger community of all living beings to which they also belong. There would no longer be employers and employees, but people working and contributing together to make this a better world. And each contributing according to their own talents. And compassion, empathy, and respect for all would be seen as cardinal virtues. Leadership would be shared, an obvious implication of getting rid of hierarchy. And oldsters would be valued as a source of knowledge and seen as a commons in their own right. Significantly, the most important parts of life, like child rearing, would be seen as everyone's job. All would mother and father. And in line with Aboriginal values, children would not be interfered with, not scolded, not reprimanded, not told what they should do, except when intruding on the rights of others, but rather would be nurtured and allowed to find their own way. Schooling, as we now see it, would not exist. Schooling would indeed exist, but not as the imprisonment it is now. It would be experiential, it would be nurturing, with a commodity placed on creativity and skills for community living. Examples of the type of learning that would be emphasized are conflict resolution, peace building, active listening, giving and receiving of empathy, surviving in the wilderness, and of course, thinking outside the box. Just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the difference, children would not only, let's take a look at children in your average classroom, which today are being diagnosed all the time with ADHD. Not only would children not be diagnosed with ADHD for daydreaming, but rather dreaming would be seen and welcomed as a form of creativity from which both the individual and the entire community benefits. So in fact, it would be celebrated as opposed to pathologized. Even before I go any further, you can begin to see the benefit that one could get from this society to the so-called mad, the benefit of our organizing ourselves and living according to this kind of way of thinking. If we live in this more holistic, pluralistic, and accepting way, people are less likely to be beset by problems. And what relates to this, they are less likely to be seen as being or having a problem. This is a natural consequence. The minute content of the education could in turn bolster this very helpful direction. In addition to what is already outlined, part of everyone's education would be studying the contributions of people deemed mad. Also co-investigating myths which inherently problematize such concepts as madness. To give you an example of a myth I know everyone would be familiar with, one of the things people could study in school is the myth of Cassandra. People maybe remember Cassandra was Princess of Troy, and she was blessed with a gift of prophecy and cursed with a plague that no one would believe her prophecies, even though they would always be true. So she would prophesy and she would be correct, but no one would believe her. Hence both the gift and the curse. Her famous prophecy, of course, was the prophecy of the fall of Troy. She foretold the fall of Troy, but of course no one believed her. As the time for the catastrophe neared, Cassandra started roaming through the streets of Troy, frantic, her hair going in all directions, addressing anyone who would listen, saying, "Listen, Troy is about to fall. We have to do something." Naturally, she wasn't believed, and she was locked in a citadel, the precursor of a psychiatric institution, so no one would have to hear her lunatic rants. Well, we all know what happened next. Troy did indeed fall by virtue of the Trojan horse maneuver. The Greek soldiers created this wooden horse that looked like a gift. It was taken into the city, got through the gates, and when night fell, armored Greek soldiers emerged from the Trojan horse and indeed conquered the unprepared Trojans. From such myths, students from their earliest years would come to appreciate that people who see things differently are not to be shunned, not a danger to be controlled, but indeed gifted people from whom others can learn. Moreover, oftentimes a warning sign of danger. Nor is this remotely as far as one could go. All children could be taught what I have dubbed mad literacy, and I'm very much recommending this happens. It's the direction we pursue. The assumption behind this recommendation is that nobody talks gibberish, but it is a problem that some people are not understood. The problem, however, is not with them. The problem is with a society where only one way of thinking and conceptualizing is understood. There are people, throughout the history of helping relations in various countries, and I'll name two that you do know about, seminal thinkers like Lang and Gregory Bateson, who well understood that society was inherently involved and well understood that the utterances being dismissed as meaningless were meaningful. Nonetheless, if I look at Lang and Bateson, in their own way, they still conceptualize the disconnect between people and society as a deficit in the person who they nonetheless labeled schizophrenic. A deficit that a skilled therapist, in this case existential therapist, could make up for, but a deficit nonetheless. Obviously, this is better than thinking people are speaking nonsense or delusionary concepts, but it is still not good enough. And so the conceptualization which I'm advancing in its place is that what we have here is not schizophrenia, is not any of the ways we've conceptualized in the past, but is indeed a problem of illiteracy on our parts. That most of us are quite simply mad illiterate. I'm not going to go into this in depth in the speech because it's not possible, but we don't know how to react to people who think figuratively rather than literally. We don't know how to react to people who have who literalize their metaphors. But in fact, there is nothing wrong with that way of thinking. We are simply illiterate, and we need a society that is far more literate. If we approached it this way, if everyone were taught to read what would otherwise be seen as alien utterances and so discounted, the basis is set for acceptance, mutual understanding, and respect. Additionally, students from their earliest years might be engaged in working through a variety of concrete scenarios involving distressed people, so they get a feel for various ways to help people when in distress, whether those people were what would have once been called mad, or whether it is the stress that we all see about us every day. Even before we think of services, you can see that people now deem mad, or indeed anyone in distress, and we all sometimes are, would be in a far better position. That said, to get down to services per se, in line with the value placed on pluralism and choice, there would be a plurality of services with people able to choose what works for them, whether it be yoga, music therapy, a place to scream or cry, a place to be held. And let's be clear that plurality is needed and choice is absolutely essential. Compulsory services or services, because this is all that's available, is no kind of service at all. With everyone from their earliest years being provided with general helping skills, everyone would take their turn at being a befriender. And please note, I've used the word befriender. That's very different than calling people psychotherapists, counselors, psychoanalysts, etc. We're talking about bringing this back to a human level, and everyone would acquire befriending skills and would take turns at being the befrienders. Everyone would also be trained at being a mediator of conflict, with the understanding that unresolved conflicts are often, one might even say usually, at the roots of seemingly individual problems. Such services would not be professionalized, and I know I'm speaking here to a professional audience, so I think this is really important to emphasize. Such services would not be professionalized or set apart, but would be built into the very fabric of life. For example, apartment buildings would always have someone on call to deal with distress that sets in the middle of the night. With, again, who is on call rotating, not a specialized person, but in fact everyone living in that apartment building, or most of the people living in that apartment building, taking turns. Correspondingly, when a problem sets in between people in the community, including in cases of aggression, a community meeting would be called. The question facing this meeting would not be who is sick and should be controlled. It would be who needs what and how to build peace in the community. You know, a simple example I want to offer of how different this would make people's lives. Let me pick an example from my research, because you know, this what I'm talking to you about comes out of the final chapter of a book based on my research, and the book again is Psychiatry and the Business of Madness. One of the women I interviewed had something that happened to her in every jurisdiction she lived, and over 3 decades. So it was a standard. We didn't get better, and it wasn't there were some privileged papers. This happened all the time. Periodically, she would be apprehended by the guys in white who would appear at her door and handcuff her and drag her to a psychiatric institution. Or if they didn't handcuff her, they would secure her in some way. The precipitating event was always the same. She would be disturbed by something happening in the social world, something like reading in the newspaper that a war was spreading, which we've gotten so blasé to that we forget that's really important. But for this woman, it was very important. And this would be the precipitating thing from which she would do the following. She would strip off her clothes and pound on people's door in her apartment building in the middle of the night, yelling, "Emergency, emergency." Now, I want you to look at that, because she's right. It is an emergency. The war is spreading. It is only us that don't see it that way. So what would happen? Her fellow residents would call the authorities, and she would be dragged to a psychiatric institution where she would be drugged out of her mind. Now she would be put on way heavier duty drugs than she would have 30 years ago, so that she would not be aware of what was happening for the first few weeks. In our utopia, here's how this situation could be handled. Somebody is on call. So if there's a person naked pounding on people's doors in the middle of the night, the person on call would go and talk to her. The person on call would invite her in, would offer her tea, would listen to her, would empathize that, yes, of course, a war is an emergency, and would help her find, some place that she can be with what's happening for the time being. And if they needed more assistance, they might call a backup person who could, because if they needed some sleep that night and it went on for hours, then they would go to a backup person. And I know this interviewee, and what I do know about her is that would have sufficed very nicely. Somebody taking her seriously when in fact she had a serious issue, and not depriving her of her life, not interfering with her life, not assuming this person's talking gibberish, because there is no emergency. Of course there's an emergency. As you can see, what I'm talking about here, where we all pull together and we all take each other seriously, and we all make sure that everyone's needs are met, and we do it jointly, this constitutes a deprofessionalization and a commoning of services. In the process, it humanizes everyone involved, and let's be clear, what we set up is not remotely human or humane. So I know that I'm talking to, a group of professionals here as one professional to another. So I know that in everyone's mind has to be the question, so is there a place for helping professionals such as us in such a society? I have a not simple answer to that question, but let me try to give it. There would be a place, but it would not be, but it would be in a limited way. So, for instance, for sure, some people like us could specialize in emotional helping, just like others specialized in woodwork, in making music, in teaching. And we could legitimately be part of helping train other people. That said, we should never be a major part of the befriending force, because then this is no longer common. Now we are, and now we claim it as our total territory, as if someone should go see a professional. Not only should we not be saying that, we should be a minor part of the befriending force. Additionally, we should have absolutely no extra say, no special decision-making authority. If the community figures things out and decides it together, we have the same voice as everyone else. It means we have to give up a whole lot of power, and if we don't give up that power, my sense is that we cannot reach a better way of dealing with people in distress or of living at all. And if we don't give it up, for all our talk, of equals, we're not creating equality, we are reinventing hierarchy, and in the process undermining community. This brings me to one final question. How can we as progressive practitioners operate now in ways conducive to the building of a society of this ilk? So I have a few suggestions, and the first is that we need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that as long as we are being empathic, we are a force for good. We may be, we may not be, and we may be a very minor force for good compared to, other things we're doing. Other suggestions: always remember that in the long run, it is better that people turn to one another than turn to us. Additionally, I'm asking people, and I'm inviting practitioners here today on a regular basis to ask yourself this. And, I have 3 questions for you. 3 questions I'm inviting you to ask yourself, and to do so on a regular basis, because I think we need to do that if we are to be, a contributor to the better society rather than something that hurts and makes impossible that better society. 1, how can I minimize myself and increase the perceived credibility of everyday people struggling with their problems, of helpers lower down in the hierarchy, as appropriate, of friends and loved ones? Second question, how can I transfer my skills, my knowledge, my work itself to the commons? Third question, how can I help those who come to see me build community and approach life problems in a collective, pluralistic, and egalitarian way? Obviously, what I've set out here is a challenge, a very, very deep challenge. In closing, let me suggest that our value and our ultimate value as practitioners, and history will judge us here, lies not in how many people think we've saved their lives. Hordes of people always think that, rightly or wrongly. That's not the measure. Our value is on how we meet this kind of challenge. Again, my invitation is that we make the sacrifices we have to make, and there will be sacrifices for people like ourselves who do have power, some degree of power in the society, that we make the sacrifices and meet that challenge. Thank you very much.